Dr. S.N. Balagangadhar is a professor of philosophy and director in the Department of Comparative Study of Culture at Kent University, Belgium. He has authored a book, The Heathens in His Blindness, which is also translated in Kannada. We welcome you, sir.
Okay. I suggest we begin with some kind of a thought experiment. Not really a thought experiment. Follow me in looking at India as an individual, single individual. And let's look at what India has done in the course of the last 65 years, ever since or more. Let's say ever since independence. Take that as a breaking point. And see what this individual has done. Has done where? At the level of, in the realm of social, political experiments. In the realm of society. In the realm of culture. Then we notice something very extraordinary, which is that what India has done ever since independence is to telescope or compress the events that have played over a period of 300 years in Europe and elsewhere, and telescoped it into a period of 60 years or less. We have had social democracy. We have had some kinds of socialism, of, say, for example, Ram Manohar Lohia type of socialism experiments. We have had secularism of Nehruvian variety and others. We have had Marxism from the CPI to the ML. We have had liberal thinking in the form of now defunct Swatantra Party, Chakravarti Rajgopalachari. We have had our own Dalit movements. We have had feminism. We have had anarchists. In other words, almost every single political ideology you can think of, almost every single social movement you can see in Europe, which have taken 300 years to emerge and play their stories out, India has done it in a period of 60 years. And in some senses, in fact in the most fundamental sense of the word, has rejected all these experiments. Rejected not because of any preconceived ideas, but rejected because it doesn't suit. It does not fit. Our needs, these do not fit. Our concerns, and these do not respond to our queries and our desires. Of course they exist. Socialist movement still exists in the Ram Manohar Lohia's one version, and the other socialism exists. Marxist parties exist. There are an increasing number of Dalit movements and more increasingly militant feminists. But they are also beginning to become marginal to the development of Indian society. If this way of looking at India is interesting, it's interesting because of the following. It should make us ask questions as to why all these experiments have failed, or at least have failed in delivering the goods. Either they promised in India or they delivered elsewhere. For example, social democracy has been delivering goods in Europe. One or other version of Marxism tried to do it with Eastern Europe and Soviet Union. A version of Maoism tried to do it in China, and so on and so forth. So these have been successful elsewhere, but they have failed in India. Why? There are many answers to this question, and I want to give you my answer to it. And my answer consists of a proposal, and I want to elaborate on that, which is that all these stories about society and culture and people from secularism, from liberalism to socialism and Marxism and beyond, were actually, in a certain sense of the word, responses to experiences of people in the Western countries, in the Western hemisphere of the world. Namely, they responded to the experiences and situations of people in Europe. And that what is useful there, or what works there, fails to work here. Because neither our experiences of our society, nor our society itself, is, in any sense of the word, homomorphic or isomorphic with European societies and cultures. Let's take one step back to understand this statement better. You see, if you look at social sciences today, in the 21st century, on a world level, but I'll confine myself only to India, if you look at them, and you follow the history, you try to understand where they come from. For example, notions about the state, society, citizens, representative democracy, rule of law, all these things, which we say is a cornerstone of any civilized nation, any civilized state. If we try to follow the history and see where they emerged from in India, you notice something extraordinary, which is the following. That the basic foundation blocks of these so-called sciences, social sciences that is, were actually laid in the 16th and 17th century to begin with, to the travelers to India, succeeded by the missionaries who came to India, followed by people who took these facts which were provided by the travelers and the missionaries as scientific facts and built theories on them, namely the Western and Indian social scientists, without changing anything in the edifice. All these things, in fact, in the early stages, when travelers came to India, missionaries came to India, they were talking about their experience of Indian people. For instance, when they came to India, they found that we were immoral people. They found that we had no ethics. They found that we had all kinds of false religions, all kinds of them, and so on and so forth. Now, what is amazing is to discover that in the 21st century, to this day, these ideas or these impressions that Europeans had of India have become the cornerstone of social sciences. Now, to understand it, ask yourself a following question. To understand the tragedy of this, the depth of this tragedy, if you like, compare, let's say, India to the West. See, Europe, almost as big as India, quarter of the population of India perhaps, but geographically as extended, as rich and diverse as India. So let's compare India to Europe and ask ourselves the following question. What has India contributed in the course of the last, let's say, 1,000 years? And let's compare that to European contribution to humanity. Of course, you might say, look, last 1,000 years we were under colonialisms, Islamic colonialism and British colonialism. So, okay, let's grant that and extend it by another 2,500 years, if you like, or 1,500 years. And ask ourselves the following question. What has India contributed to the history of humanity in the last 2,500 years when we compare this contribution to, let's say, that of Europe? Now, it's easy to say what Europe has contributed, in one sense. It's very difficult to say in another. Easy because we can start going on science, technology, law, democracy, art, literature, music, poetry. In other words, it's easier to say where they've even gone to the moon. So, in almost every single field of human endeavor, Europe has contributed enormously to human civilization, to human culture. And rightly we think that those contributions were wonderful. In fact, it's easier perhaps to say what Europe has not contributed than to say what Europe has contributed, because to list it, you would probably take about a year. Because in one sense you could almost say the history of mankind in the last 1,000 years is the history of Europe. Okay, what has India contributed? Let's look at the textbooks which are used today to teach our students here in the Indian universities, or the textbooks that are used in social sciences, of course, to teach students in American and European universities. What has India contributed? Here is the story, and I'm not exaggerating. India was caste-ridden, divisive, unjust society, which is dominated, or was and is dominated, by a degenerate religion called Hinduism, against earlier manifestation of which, there were many rebellions in India. For example, of Buddha, for example, the Bhakti movement, for example, the Basaveshwara, the Lingayat movement, against, of course, Brahmanism and Hinduism. There is, of course, sati, widow burning. There is child marriage. There is backwardness. There is illiteracy, etc., etc., etc. They will add in a footnote, of course, that we contributed 0 to mathematics, which is, I'm sure, a wonderful contribution, but just one numeral, 0. And of course, we have a Buddha and a Gandhi. Right, how many Buddhas do we have? One, of course, Gautama Buddha. How many Gandhis do we have? One, of course. And we also have our local heroes. It could be Basaveshwara, it could be Swami Vivekananda, it could be Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, anybody. So let's say we have about 35 heroes. And 1 0, of course, in mathematics. So 2,500 years, the contribution of India to human history consists of then these 35 people and 1 0, as I said. For the rest, what were our earlier generations doing? They were defending the caste system. They were defending the inequality of women. They were oppressing the Dalits. And there was, of course, all kinds of exploitation taking place, and so on and so forth. In other words, where one culture, namely the European culture, was busy transforming itself and the world and making wonderful contributions to human history, to human civilization, to the repertoire, to the human library, to the repertoire of human knowledge. We Indians, for 2,500 years, were busy defending, sustaining unjust, unequal, and immoral social order. This is the story that comes out from social science textbooks that are being taught today in India and elsewhere in the world. Now the question we have to ask ourselves is this: is this a plausible picture? I mean to say, is it reasonable to believe that a culture for 2,500 years on end has done only this, defend injustice, inequality, and oppress people, and survive as a culture? Is it possible? But when I raised this question this time in Karnataka, I got extraordinary answers, which has puzzled me even more. You see, most people did not appear to be disturbed by this question at all. They said, yes, sir, that is why we have to do something today, because we have done nothing last 2,500 years.